At the end of the war, many perpetrators were tried, others fled, and some died alongside Hitler in the heart of the bunker. But their names did not disappear. Decades later, the heirs of the Third Reich are still alive. Some broke with their past, changed their identities, or chose internal exile. Others maintained family fortunes, held public office, kept archives, or simply remained silent. Blood links them to those who designed the most lethal system of the 20th century. Who are the descendants of the Nazi leaders? What part of the Reich lives on in those who inherited it? And what happens when what you inherit is not just a name, but a crime? Goebbels' clan, the invisible heirs of Magda and Joseph. The Harold holding company Quant operates from Bad Homburg is considered one of Germany's most discreet wealth structures. From there, 5 women control holdings, including BMW, technology investments, and real estate assets valued at billions of euros. Their quarterly meetings take place in corporate rooms without family photographs, historical memorabilia, or references to the past that built their fortune. Bettina, Gabriele, Annette, Katharina, and Patricia Quant manage Gunther's legacy Quant, an industrialist who, during the Third Reich, converted his factories into centers of war production using 50,000 slave laborers. Jewish, Polish, and Soviet prisoners manufactured submarine batteries, missile components, and weapons in plants where mortality figures were not recorded in official documents. The Quant fortune was built through methods that went beyond slave labor. During the 1930s, Gunther Quant was active in the Aryanization of Jewish businesses, a process by which prosperous businesses were confiscated from their original owners and transferred to German entrepreneurs at ridiculously low prices. The Simpson brothers' textile business in Suhl, the Goldschmidt family's machine shops in Hanover, and Samuel Hirsch's electrical components factory in Stuttgart all passed into Quant's hands for fractions of their real value. The system operated with bureaucratic efficiency. Nazi authorities appraised Jewish property below market value, the original owners were forced to sell under threat of deportation, and collaborationist entrepreneurs like Quant acquired entire industrial assets for nominal sums. In many cases, the former owners were subsequently deported to concentration camps, eliminating any possibility of future reclaiming. The family connection emerges in a genealogical detail the sisters prefer to omit. Magda Goebbels was their grandmother. The wife of the Minister of Propaganda, symbolic mother of the Reich, murdered her own children in Hitler's bunker. On May 1, 1945, Magda sedated her 6 children with morphine and then inserted cyanide capsules into their mouths. She dressed them in white nightgowns, combed their hair, and returned to the bunker hallway with reddened eyes. Hours later, she committed suicide alongside Joseph Goebbels in the garden. For her, a world without National Socialism was not worth living in. BMW represents its most visible asset. When the car company faced bankruptcy in the 1960s, Herbert Quant rescued it by establishing family shareholding control that remains. The sisters jointly inherited these shares in 1978, becoming major shareholders of a brand with a turnover of tens of billions annually. Every BMW vehicle sold worldwide generates dividends that flow into bank accounts whose ultimate origins date back to gas chambers and slave labor barracks. Their wealth management avoids any public exposure. They don't appear on lists of influential businesswomen, they don't grant interviews to financial media, and they don't participate in economic forums. Operational management is in the hands of professional managers, while they limit themselves to strategic decisions in closed family meetings held in German, a language they all speak fluently despite decades of international life. In 2011, media pressure forced a historical reckoning. The documentary The Silence of the Quants had exposed for the first time the family's direct collaboration with Nazism, showing documents and testimonies about the systematic use of slave labor. Public pressure forced the sisters to commission historian Joachim Scholtisek an independent study that documented Gunther's business collaboration in more than 1,000 pages Quant with the Nazi regime. Scholtisek report revealed devastating details. At the Hanover Stocken factory, more than 20,000 forced laborers manufactured torpedoes and ammunition under conditions that caused thousands of deaths from exhaustion, malnutrition, and disease. At the Ufa plants, Fabrik Sonnenberg, Soviet prisoners of war produced submarine batteries working 16-hour shifts on survival rations. Accounting records of the time recorded these workers as units of production. not as human beings. Gabriele Quandt, the eldest, issued statements acknowledging these family ties following the report's release. Patricia expressed deep regret for the suffering caused during the Nazi regime. However, these statements did not result in significant financial compensation or changes to the estate structure. The factories where slave laborers died continue to operate under modern corporate names. Dividends continue to flow into the same bank accounts that profited from the genocide. Bettina Quandt represents the only visible break in this silent process. At 16, she discovered Magda Goebbels' real identity when a history teacher showed her class photographs of Joseph Goebbels' family. She immediately recognized her grandmother in the regime's official images. That night, she confronted her mother, who confirmed the family connection she had kept hidden for years. The revelation led Bettina to an identity crisis that led to her conversion to Judaism, marriage to a descendant of Holocaust survivors, and definitive removal from the family estate. Her sisters chose less dramatic paths, but equally far from scrutiny. Gabriele temporarily turned to Marxist activism during the 1970s, participating in student demonstrations and radical leftist groups, as if communism could atone for the capitalist sins of her great-grandfather. Katerina dedicated herself to the world of entertainment and socializing, frequenting European artistic circles where her surname Quandt hadn't generated historical recognition. Annette started a large family in Switzerland and retired completely from business, devoting herself to discreet philanthropy. Patricia completed studies in molecular biology in New York and maintained a low-key academic profile, specializing in genetic research in private laboratories. The holding's current structure allows for professional management without direct staff involvement. The offices in Bad Homburg employs 43 people, specialized financial advisors, international legal consultants, wealth managers with experience in complex fortunes, and analysts who monitor global markets. Strategic decisions are made in closed family meetings held 3 times a year, but day-to-day operations take place without the visible presence of the heirs. Over the past few decades, this setup has proven effective in preserving and multiplying inherited capital. Investments have diversified into technology, stakes in German artificial intelligence startups, real estate, commercial properties in Frankfurt and Munich, and financial sectors, investment funds operating in Asian markets. The wealth has not only been maintained but has grown exponentially since the initial inheritance in 1978. The family's private archives remain inaccessible under the custody of Swiss law firms specializing in asset secrecy. There are no authorized memoirs, published correspondence, or historical documentation available to researchers. This opacity contrasts with other German business families such as the Krupps and Thysens, who have partially opened their historical archives to facilitate academic studies of their involvement in the Nazi regime. In Bad Homburg, the offices of the Harold Holding Company Quandt occupies an inconspicuous glass and steel building in the financial district. Young employees, modern technology, digitized quarterly reports, virtual meetings with international managers. Corporate modernity has effectively buried its criminal past. Nothing in the facility indicates that it administers dividends ultimately originating from the slave labor organized by Heinrich Himmler and supervised by Rudolf Höss. The 5 sisters have achieved what many descendants of Nazi leaders have failed to do: transform a compromised inheritance into respectable asset management that generates growing profits without significant public questioning. BMW is listed on international stock exchanges, generates direct employment for 150,000 people, and produces vehicles valued worldwide for their quality and technological innovation. The origin of this shareholding has been reduced to a historical note in academic studies that few read and even fewer remember. The Höss, the grandchildren of the commandant of Auschwitz. Rainer Höss transforms school classrooms into historic courtrooms where he himself sits in the dock. Not as the guilty party, but as the bearer of a name that opens wounds that others prefer to keep closed. His office in Munich accumulates letters from students who, after hearing him, write, "I never thought I'd meet the grandson of the commandant of Auschwitz." Some express gratitude, others confusion, several contain threats. His organization, Footsteps, operates on a minimal budget and with a packed schedule. 150 annual conferences are given in German, Austrian, and Polish schools. He accompanies octogenarian survivors who visit Germany to bear witness. He participates in documentaries that seek to explain how Auschwitz was possible. His calendar is filled with events between September and June, a period during which the European education system constantly demands his presence. Rudolf Höss was not simply the commandant of Auschwitz, he was the architect of its transformation into the most efficient death machine in history. When he arrived at the camp in May 1940, Auschwitz was a relatively small facility designed for Polish political prisoners. Under his administration, it grew into an extermination industrial complex covering 40 square kilometers and including more than 40 subcamps. Höss lived with his family within the compound in a 10-room residence built specifically for the commandant. The house included a modern kitchen, bathrooms with hot water, a personal library, and a garden tended by camp prisoners. His 5 children grew up watching the crematorium chimneys from their bedroom windows. The family had forced servants, 2 Jehovah's Witness women who cleaned the house and prepared meals under constant threat. Höss' children played in the garden while the gas chambers operated meters away. They rode bicycles along the compound's paths, swam in pools built by prisoners, and celebrated birthdays with cakes made by camp cooks. This domestic normalcy coexisted with the systematic murder of 1 million people. Rainer's father grew up in this environment where genocide was a parental routine and mass suffering was the daily landscape of childhood. Rainer inherited family documents that constitute his primary educational material. The archive includes correspondence between Rudolf and Heinrich Himmler regarding technical improvements in extermination methods, photographs of the family villa with prisoners working in the garden, and letters from Rudolf to his wife describing satisfactory progress in special operations. It also preserves everyday objects: the typewriter on which Rudolf wrote reports on extermination capacity, the pocket watch he used during gas chamber inspections, and his children's toys found in the attic of the family home. In 2009, he initially offered these belongings to the Yad Memorial, Vashem, sparking international controversy. Holocaust survivors and scholars interpreted the offer as an attempt to profit financially from the memory of the genocide. Israeli newspapers published articles questioning Rainer's motivations. He eventually donated all the materials to the Munich Institute for Contemporary History, where they remain archived for academic research under access restrictions that protect historical sensitivities. His family rift was definitively finalized in 2009 when he was officially disinherited by a notarized document signed by his father. The family's ruling ruled that Rainer's public statements betrayed his grandfather's memory and disgraced the Höss name. Since then, he has lived exclusively on lecture fees between 500 and 1,500 euros depending on the institution, and educational contributions, maintaining a modest standard of living in rented apartments that he frequently changes for safety reasons. The threats he received document the persistence of German and Austrian neo-Nazi networks. Far-right groups considered him a traitor to the German heritage and an agent of the international Jewish lobby. In 2015, white supremacists impersonated him on online forums to link his name to Holocaust denial propaganda, publishing alleged statements in which Rainer acknowledged that the Holocaust had been exaggerated by Zionist interests. The disinformation operation forced the intervention of German authorities and police protection for several months. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, he regularly leads groups of Israeli, German, and Polish students. His presence as the commandant's grandson generates reactions ranging from initial rejection to morbid curiosity about his unique perspective. Some Israeli students initially refused to listen to him, considering his presence at the site where their grandfather orchestrated the murder of their relatives obscene. However, most eventually recognized the educational value of his testimony. The most photographed and controversial moment of his career was his public embrace with Eva Moses, Kor, a survivor of Josef Mengeler's medical experiments. The encounter occurred during a memorial visit to Auschwitz in 2014. The image of the commandant's grandson embracing a 90-year-old survivor went viral, but it divided opinions about the appropriateness of reconciliatory gestures in sacred Holocaust memorial spaces. Her work with survivors includes practical logistical facilitation for elderly people visiting Germany for educational testimonies. She coordinates hotel accommodations, accessible transportation for people with reduced mobility, and medical accompaniment during visits to concentration camps that can be emotionally devastating. This practical collaboration has gradually built trust with families of survivors who were initially wary of someone with the surname Höss. Holocaust educators recognize the unique effectiveness of Rainer's teaching method. Professor Klaus Tschira of the University of Heidelberg has documented that students who attend Rainer's lectures demonstrate a 40% greater retention of specific historical information and develop a deeper understanding of the bureaucratic mechanisms that made the genocide possible. Rainer's physical presence as a descendant of the perpetrator creates an emotional impact that complements traditional historical education based on books and documentaries. BBC, ZDF, and PBS documentaries have featured him as a central figure in programs about Auschwitz. He never charges for these appearances, making his participation conditional on the programs maintaining historical accuracy and avoiding sensationalism. His on-screen remarks are invariably straightforward. "My grandfather was a mass murderer. There is no possible justification for what he did. My obligation is to make sure people understand how it was possible." Rainer lives in Munich on a minimal pension from the German state and a modest two-room apartment that he rents month to month. His only valuable possessions are the family documents he uses for his education and a library specializing in Holocaust history that he has built over decades. The personal archive he keeps at home includes original correspondence between Rudolf Höss and Heinrich Himmler regarding technical improvements at Auschwitz, swingingly previously unpublished photographs of the family villa, and more than 3,000 letters from survivors, students, and scholars who wrote to him after his lectures. This material constitutes a unique account of the daily workings of the largest Nazi extermination camp from the perspective of the perpetrator's family. The blood of Eichmann Goeth, Jennifer Teege, the Afro-German granddaughter of the commandant of Plazow. A Hamburg library became the epicenter of identity collapse when Jennifer Teege recognized her biological mother in the pages of a book that told Monica's story. Hertwig, daughter of Amon Goeth. The Plazow commandant who shot prisoners from his balcony, the executioner immortalized by Ralph Fiennes in Schindler's List, was his maternal grandfather. The book was titled Ich muss doch mein Vater lieben, oder I have to love my father, right? Autobiography of a woman who had lived her entire life under the shadow of a war criminal. The existential contradiction was devastating. An Afro-German woman, raised in German culture, educated in Israel, with ties to Jewish communities, she discovered that she was descended from the Nazi criminal notorious for his sadistic cruelty. Her black skin and African features represented exactly what her grandfather would have considered subhuman and destined for extermination under the racial laws he himself enforced daily in Plazow. Amon Goeth arrived in Krakow in February 1943 with the mission of building and running the Plazow concentration camp. A month later, he spearheaded the brutal liquidation of the Krakow ghetto, an operation that deported useful workers to the new camp and murdered the rest in the streets or sent them directly to Auschwitz. He also oversaw the liquidation of the Tarnow ghetto, demonstrating administrative efficiency that impressed his SS superiors. His presence in Plazow left a mark of systematic terror and personal sadism. Every morning he carried out inspections, during which he executed prisoners without warning for imaginary infractions, walking too slowly, stopping to rest, looking directly at the guards. He had 2 German dogs specifically trained to tear prisoners to pieces, animals he used as instruments of psychological and physical torture. A cook was killed because the soup was too hot, a seamstress because she folded a shirt incorrectly, a carpenter because he took 5 minutes extra to complete a task. Jennifer had lived in Tel Aviv during her 20s, learned fluent Hebrew, and established deep friendships in Israeli Jewish communities. Her identity had been consciously constructed around cultural ties to Israel, rejection of historical German racism, and solidarity with victims of genocide. She had visited Yad Vashem as a pilgrim, not as a tourist. Discovering that she was the direct granddaughter of the Plazow executioner triggered a psychological crisis that required 3 weeks of psychiatric hospitalization in 2008. His autobiographical book, Amon, My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me, was written in collaboration with journalist Nicola Selmer during a therapeutic process that lasted 2.5 years. The work included exhaustive research on Plazow based on survivor testimonies, interviews with Helen Hirsch and Helen Jonas, the two Jewish maids who worked at Goethe's villa, and a painstaking reconstruction of family silences that had deliberately concealed the grandfather's criminal identity. The writing process revealed devastating details about everyday life in Plazow under Goethe's administration. Hujowa Hill Gorka within the camp became a common site of mass executions, where prisoners were forced to dig their own graves before being shot. Goethe applied systematic collective punishment. If one prisoner escaped, 10 were killed in retaliation. If someone was caught stealing food, their entire barracks would lose rations for a week. Random House published the book in 2013, immediately achieving bestseller status in Germany, selling over 300,000 copies in its first year. Translations into 15 languages – English, French, Spanish, Italian, Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Polish, Czech, Hungarian, Russian, Japanese, Korean and Hebrew, and international distribution generated royalties exceeding €800,000, providing Jennifer with the financial stability to devote herself exclusively to educational activities. Her current residence in Hamburg reflects this new identity, a spacious apartment in the Altona district where she raises her two sons, Niklas, 15, and David, 12, surrounded by a library that combines books on the history of the Holocaust, African culture, and contemporary German literature. The walls display photographs from her travels to Nigeria, her biological father's country of origin, Israel and Poland, continents and countries that represent the complex and irreconcilable aspects of her multicultural heritage. Her work as an intercultural consultant for German companies leverages her unique personal experience to improve corporate diversity and inclusion policies. Volkswagen, Siemens, Deutsche Bank and BMW have hired her to train executives on cultural sensitivity in the contemporary German context. Her fees, between €2,000 and €5,000 per working day, reflect the specificity of her expertise, an Afro-German woman descended from a Nazi criminal who understands the complexities of identity, memory, and historical responsibility from within. The lectures he gives follow a specific structure developed through years of experience. He begins by recounting his family discovery without excessive dramatization, continues by analyzing the identity contradictions that his life represents, a potential victim of his own grandfather, and concludes by reflecting on historical and contemporary racism. His presentations last exactly 90 minutes, include 30 minutes of questions, and always end with the same phrase: "Blood does not determine destiny, but conscience does determine decisions." German and international networks have documented her story extensively. CNN, BBC, and ARD have produced extensive reports on her case, with particular emphasis on the racial paradox her existence represents. The animated short film Holy Holocaust adapted her experience using animation techniques that visualize the fracture of identity, while documentaries such as Descendants of the Reich and My Nazi Legacy present her as a central figure in the contemporary debate on Nazi heritage. A London-based management agency handles these appearances, coordinating fees ranging from €5,000 to €15,000, depending on the production and international reach. Jennifer raises her children in Hamburg, gradually explaining their family history to them without turning it into a shameful secret or a dominant obsession. Her teaching methods for addressing complex historical legacies have been studied and adopted by German family therapists specializing in intergenerational trauma. Vashem uses its educational materials in international programs, while the Goethe Institute regularly includes it in conferences on the construction of contemporary German identity in multicultural contexts. Her next publishing project will specifically explore her children's experience as third-generation descendants of Nazi criminals. Rowohlt has shown significant commercial interest in this perspective, which would examine how contemporary children process the knowledge of having a war criminal great-grandfather while being German citizens of mixed heritage in a society that defines itself as multicultural but maintains persistent racial tensions. The relationship with Monika Hertwig, her biological mother, remains distant and emotionally complex. The sporadic encounters documented by Jennifer in personal diaries that could constitute material for a second book reveal the impossibility of establishing a traditional mother-daughter bond. Monica, now 78, represents for Jennifer the silence and denial that characterized post-war Germany. Generations that preferred not to know, not to ask, not to confront their family's participation in genocide. Himmler lineage, descendants of the architect of the Holocaust. Katrin Himmler transformed his cursed surname into a tool for historical research, applying rigorous academic methodology to dismantle family myths that had survived for decades in post-war German narratives. His work, The Brothers Himmler, is not only a family biography but also an X-ray of how everyday complicities that made genocide possible functioned at the domestic, professional, and social levels. Heinrich Himmler built the most effective repressive apparatus of the Third Reich, transforming the SS from a protection unit of 300 men in 1929 into a paramilitary structure of nearly 1 million members in 1945. His influence extended far beyond police control. From 1943, he also headed the Reich Ministry of the Interior, articulating an entire state administration based on systematic terror, racial classification, and industrial extermination. Under his command, the Einsatzgruppen were born, mobile extermination squads that followed the German army in its invasion of Eastern Europe, executing entire communities of Jews, Polish intellectuals, Soviet officials, and Roma. These groups murdered more than 1 million people through mass shootings in forests, ravines, and mass graves. Himmler also centralized the network of concentration camps under specialized SS administration, turning Dachau, Buchenwald, Mauthausen, and later Auschwitz into industrial extermination centers. Katrin's research documented that Ernst Himmler, her grandfather, had not been the passive bystander portrayed in family narratives for decades. An active member of the SS since 1933 with service number 239795, Ernst worked as a sound engineer for the Reichsrundfunkgesellschaft, Reich National Radio, a position that made him a direct collaborator of the Nazi propaganda machine. In this technical role, he participated in the dissemination of Hitler's speeches, anti-Semitic broadcasts, and programs that psychologically prepared the German population for genocidal measures. Katrin discovered in family archives included letters in which Ernst expressed enthusiasm for the necessary measures against undesirable elements, and specifically recommended the deportation of Jewish engineers from companies where he performed technical work. A letter dated March 1943, addressed to labor authorities in Munich, describes as urgent and necessary the relocation of Samuel Goldstein, a radio electronics technician whose presence affects the German morale of the work team. Goldstein was deported to Theresienstadt 6 weeks later. Her academic training in political science at the Free University of Berlin provided her with methodological tools to systematically approach family history without falling into emotional justifications or defensive denials. She completed doctoral research on contemporary German foreign policy, focusing specifically on relations between the Federal Republic and Israel, a topic that took on a personal dimension when she met her future husband while researching Israeli diplomatic archives. The publication of The Brothers Himmler in 2005 was based on a rigorous analysis of over 1,000 private letters exchanged between Heinrich, his wife Margarete, his daughter Gudrun, and relatives outside the immediate Nazi establishment. These documents, preserved in cardboard boxes in the basement of the family home, revealed the gradual internalization of Nazi ideology into the everyday domestic life of an educated middle-class German family. The letters showed how Heinrich described his criminal activities to his family using bureaucratic euphemisms that concealed the reality of the extermination behind administrative language. References to resettlements, special measures, solving demographic problems, and territorial cleansing appeared in family correspondence alongside comments about vacations, children's health, and domestic matters. This linguistic normalization of genocide illustrated how German families processed and accepted mass crimes through a semantic disconnect between actions and consequences. Her work not only documented individual crimes but also analyzed the familial and social mechanisms that constructed justificatory narratives during the post-war period. The research revealed how thousands of German families adopted narratives in which their relatives did not know what was really happening, were just following orders, tried to help when they could, or internally opposed it even though they couldn't express it. These mythical constructions blocked a real understanding of how the Nazi regime worked and facilitated the social reintegration of perpetrators without assuming historical responsibility. Family reactions to the publication were immediate and divisive. Conservative sectors of the Himmler family, especially uncles and cousins from the Bavarian branch, accused Katrin of betraying the family memory and sullying the family name for Jewish money. Some relatives cut off communication permanently, excluding her from family gatherings and traditional celebrations. Simultaneously, German and Austrian neo-Nazi groups threatened her for dishonoring the greatness of the Reichsführer and serving anti-German interests. These threats, documented by the German police, necessitated security precautions for 2 years following the publication. Her decision to retain the surname Himmler, unlike other descendants who legally changed it, responds to a specific ethical and methodological conviction. She believes that changing one's name does not alter family history or eliminate inherited responsibilities, and prefers to publicly demonstrate that the Himmler surname can be associated with rigorous research, historical responsibility, and a commitment to memory rather than exclusively with genocidal crimes. This position distinguishes her from cousins who changed their surnames to variations such as Himmel or Himmels to avoid public recognition. Prenzlauer District, Berg. In a gentrified neighborhood where she lives in a 4-room apartment with a specialized library, Katrin pursues a dual career as a political scientist specializing in international relations and as an independent historical researcher. Her home reflects this dual focus. Shelves combine academic literature on contemporary diplomacy with family archives, documentation on the workings of the SS, and personal correspondence that forms the basis of her ongoing work on German memory. Her current family situation includes marriage since 2001 to Ari Paltiel, an Israeli citizen specializing in contemporary European history, whom she met during research in the Yad archives. Vashem. Her son, Daniel Himmler Paltiel, born in 2003, represents a symbolic convergence of seemingly irreconcilable historical memories: grandson of a Holocaust victim on his father's side, great-grandson of the Holocaust architect on his mother's side. This family configuration has led Katrin to develop specific pedagogical approaches to explain complex histories without generating unnecessary psychological trauma, but without obscuring fundamental historical responsibilities. German, Israeli, and American universities regularly request her services as a lecturer specializing in the intergenerational transmission of historical memory. Munich, Heidelberg, Humboldt, Harvard, Yale, Hebrew University, and Tel Aviv have organized monographic seminars on his methodological research. His academic fees, between 3,000 and 8,000 euros per lecture, depending on the institution and duration, provide sufficient income to support him part-time in independent historical research while simultaneously developing a career in international policy consulting. His publishing activity has continued with projects on German historical memory that go beyond his specific family case. He collaborates with specialized academic journals such as Vierteljahrshefte for Zeitgeschichte and Geschichte and Gesellschaft, participates in collective projects on intergenerational responsibility funded by German foundations, and contributes to comparative studies on descendants of perpetrators of genocide in different historical contexts: Armenia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia. His publications since The Brothers Himmler have comparatively analyzed German families that faced their Nazi past differently. The study Silence and Speech: Family Strategies in Post-War Germany, 2011, documented cases of families that chose active confrontation, such as the descendants of Klaus von Stauffenberg, persistent denial, such as sections of the Göring family, and silent coping, such as branches of the Krupp family. This comparative work revealed that family responses to the Nazi past did not depend on the severity of the crimes committed, but on cultural, educational, and economic factors specific to each family group. Katrin Himmler has transformed a cursed surname into a tool for rigorous knowledge of how German families functioned during and after Nazism. His son, Daniel, raised with a knowledge of both German and Israeli history through his father, represents a new generation inheriting a complex but honest memory of historical responsibilities. In Berlin, this 56-year-old political scientist continues to demonstrate that confronting the family past with an academic methodology generates deeper and more socially useful understanding than the defensive silence, systematic denial, or emotional dramatization that have characterized many German approaches to the Nazi legacy. The Göring family, Bettina Göring, and voluntary extinction. In the mountains of New Mexico, Bettina Göring cultivates medicinal plants and practices energy therapies from a house he built with natural materials, specifically designed to erase any visual or symbolic connection to Europe. His most radical decision was not geographical exile, but voluntary sterilization at age 30. He biologically severed Hermann's lineage. Göring, through irreversible surgery that she herself describes as the most important act of my life. His great-uncle Hermann Göring amassed power in the Third Reich from multiple strategic positions that made him one of the regime's chief architects. He founded the Gestapo in 1933, became Supreme Commander of the Luftwaffe, responsible for the 4-year plan that controlled large sectors of the German economy during the war, and one of the main organizers of the systematic plundering of art during the European occupation. Hitler granted him the unique rank of Reichsmarschall, a position superior to any other military commander in the regime. His personal signature appears on the order that officially initiated the final solution. During the occupation of France, Göring personally oversaw the theft of works of art on a scale unprecedented in history. His name appears more than 130 times in Allied files on cultural plunder. Selected pieces ended up in his Karinhall residence, an opulent 100,000-acre estate converted into a personal sanctuary from European plunder. His personal collection is estimated to have been worth over $200 million at the time, including works by Monet, Van Gogh, Renoir, and classical sculptures stolen from French, Dutch, and Polish museums. Bettina's family breakdown began dramatically at age 13 when her paternal grandmother, who had maintained close personal ties with Hermann during the regime, Göring systematically denied the existence of the Holocaust during a family confrontation. The elderly woman displayed portraits of Hermann in the main living room of the house, referred to him as Great Hermann in everyday conversation, and claimed that the concentration camps had been workplaces where Jews lived better than many Germans. Unable to live with this active denial, Bettina left the family home that same night without saying goodbye. Her adolescence was spent erratically in hippie communes, spiritual movements, and countercultural communities flourishing in Europe and America during the 1970s and 1980s. She lived in ashrams in India, participated in indigenous ceremonies in Mexico, joined women's communities in California, experimented with psychedelic drugs in Amsterdam, and constantly sought out philosophies that would allow her to construct an identity completely separate from her German surname. Each experience represented an attempt to reinvent herself away from the European history that had shaped her since birth. During her stay at a spiritual commune in Goa, India, Bettina made the most radical decision of her life: voluntary sterilization at age 30 by tubal ligation performed at a local hospital. The surgical intervention was not for medical or economic reasons, but rather a deep philosophical conviction that certain surnames do not deserve biological continuity. Her brother Klaus made the same decision by undergoing a vasectomy, expressing it in a phrase Bettina frequently quotes, "I have cut the bloodline." Hermann. Göring dies with me. The choice of New Mexico as his permanent residence was a response to his search for a cultural environment completely removed from European history, where his surname wouldn't trigger automatic reactions of recognition, repulsion, or morbid curiosity. In Santa Fe and later Taos, he found communities of immigrants, alternative artists, holistic therapists, and spiritual seekers, where his surname Göring didn't trigger immediate historical references. This cultural invisibility allowed him to build a professional and personal identity completely disconnected from his family heritage. Her current professional activity focuses on holistic therapies that combine energy techniques learned in India, work with medicinal plants native to New Mexico, and body healing practices based on shamanic traditions. She sees local clients in her home, between 15 and 20 regular patients, occasionally participates in spiritual retreats organized by New Age communities in the region, and offers emotional release sessions for people who have experienced family trauma. Her monthly income ranges between $2,000 and $3,000, enough to maintain an austere but comfortable standard of living. He occasionally appears in documentaries such as Bloodlines, 2007, and Hitler's, 2007. Children, 2011, but only under strict contractual conditions that avoid sensationalism, excessive dramatization, or approaches that turn her story into a media spectacle. She does not seek public attention or consider her experience a universal political message. Her life in Taos is deliberately kept away from debates about historical memory, Holocaust education, or German intergenerational responsibilities. The sterilization he underwent at the age of 30, along with the identical decision of his brother Klaus, represents the definitive biological end of Hermann's direct lineage, Göring. Both brothers consciously considered that certain surnames, due to the magnitude of the crimes associated with them, did not deserve genetic continuity in future generations. This radical decision illustrates the lengths to which some descendants are willing to go to completely break with historical legacies they consider morally intolerable. Her current home on the outskirts of Taos, built with adobe and reclaimed wood using traditional architectural techniques from the American Southwest, functions simultaneously as a private residence and a therapeutic space where she receives clients. The environment is intentionally designed to promote emotional tranquility and complete disconnection from European references. Gardens with native medicinal plants, meditation spaces oriented according to Feng Shui principles, and a complete absence of objects, books, music, or images reminiscent of Germany, Nazism, or 20th century European history. In the mountains of New Mexico, surrounded by desert landscapes unmatched in Europe, Bettina has found the inner peace that was systematically denied to her during her first 30 years in Germany. Her daily routine includes sunrise meditation, tending medicinal gardens, therapeutic sessions with local clients, and participating in spiritual ceremonies with indigenous communities that have accepted her as an honorary member. At 73, this woman, who inherited one of the most toxic surnames in modern history, has managed to build an existence completely disconnected from her family origins, demonstrating that it is possible to make a radical and definitive break with historical legacies through extreme personal decisions that are consistent with deep ethical convictions. Eichmanns, Heirs of the Logistics of Genocide. In the offices of the German Archaeological Institute, Ricardo Eichmann examines ancient ceramics from Mesopotamian civilizations, while his surname resonates simultaneously in classrooms where Holocaust history is taught to students who would never connect the discreet archaeologist with the organizer of mass deportations. The son of the man who coordinated the transportation of millions of Jews to extermination camps, he has meticulously built an academic career specializing in civilizations that flourished thousands of years before the rise of National Socialism. Adolf Eichmann coordinated the systematic deportation of millions of European Jews to extermination camps between 1941 and 1945. His specific logistical responsibilities included organizing train schedules that transported between 3,000 and 5,000 people daily to Auschwitz, administrative coordination with local authorities in occupied countries to facilitate resettlements, and bureaucratic management of the systematic looting of Jewish property that partially financed the deportation operations. Eichmann personally drafted the official minutes of the Wannsee Conference of January 20, 1942, a meeting where 15 senior Nazi officials administratively planned the genocide of 11 million European Jews. His RSHA Department 4B, for centralized information on Jewish communities throughout the occupied territories, organized the systematic dispossession of property prior to deportations and coordinated with German railway authorities the mass transport of Jewish people to extermination centers. During the occupation of Hungary in 1944, Eichmann personally oversaw the most intensive deportations of the entire war. More than 400,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz in just 8 weeks, an operation whose efficiency astonished even SS officers experienced in genocide. His participation was not limited to carrying out orders from above. Court documents from the Jerusalem trial reveal that he expressed personal satisfaction with the effective solution to the Jewish problem, and stated that taking responsibility for millions of deaths to the grave gave him professional pride. Ricardo's academic specialization in Egyptology and Near Eastern archaeology has led him for 4 decades to direct excavations at Tel Halaf, Syria, research projects in Petra, Jordan, and studies on ancient urban planning at sites in Lebanon. His Munich office is decorated exclusively with topographic maps of archaeological sites, ceramic fragments catalogued according to millennia-old chronologies, and photographs of international excavation teams where he appears as a technical expert, never as a controversial historical figure. His ideological and emotional distancing from his family began during his adolescence, when he independently, without parental support or guidance, researched his father's documented crimes by reading in public libraries and German court archives. While his older brothers, Klaus, Horst, and Dieter, developed interpretations that justified or minimized paternal responsibility, Ricardo developed a critical understanding that led him to completely reject any relativization of genocidal crimes. Klaus and Horst Eichmann not only publicly defended their father's memory, but also founded neo-Nazi organizations in Argentina during the 1960s and 1970s, actively promoted Holocaust denial through clandestine publications, and hailed Adolf Eichmann as a martyr of German patriotic duty, persecuted by an international Zionist conspiracy. From Buenos Aires, Klaus organized meetings for exiled former SS members, distributed anti-Semitic literature, and corresponded with European far-right groups until his death in 1996. Ricardo hasn't communicated with these brothers since the mid-1980s, a situation he laconically describes as an inevitable consequence of irreconcilable moral differences regarding historical responsibility and basic human values. The family's rift wasn't gradual but permanent. His last telephone conversation with Klaus ended with the latter calling Ricardo a traitor to German blood for working with Israeli colleagues on archaeological projects. In 1995, he met privately with Zvi Aharoni, the veteran Mossad agent who had captured Adolf Eichmann in Buenos Aires in 1960. The meeting, discreetly arranged during 1995 Ricardo's visit to Israel for academic research, took place in the offices of the Jerusalem Institute for Historical Studies, without media coverage or outside witnesses. The conversation lasted 2 hours, involving no ritual apologies or dramatic rebukes, but rather a factual exchange of historical circumstances and a mutual human recognition of inherited complexities. Ricardo declared after the meeting that he fully understood the historical necessity of my father's capture and execution, even though I personally oppose the death penalty in principle. This statement, published only in a specialized academic journal, illustrates his intellectual approach to issues that other descendants approach from emotional, victimizing, or denialist perspectives. He systematically and consistently rejects invitations from commercial media, publishing offers for family memoirs, and proposals to participate in sensational documentaries about Nazism. When journalists contact him by phone about his historical surname, he invariably responds with a brief statement: "I confirm the relationship, completely reject my father's crimes, and request respect for my professional privacy." He has not given extensive television interviews since the 1990s, during which time he reluctantly participated in German educational programs on intergenerational responsibility. His office at the German Archaeological Institute reflects this deliberate separation between professional identity and family history. The walls display exclusively materials related to his academic work: topographic maps of excavations, chronologies of ancient civilizations, photographs of archaeological artifacts, and specialized libraries of Near Eastern history. Colleagues who have worked with him daily for decades can completely forget his historical surname, a professional normalization that Ricardo considers one of his greatest personal achievements in constructing an alternative identity. During excavations in Jordan and Lebanon, Ricardo has routinely collaborated with Israeli archaeologists without his Eichmann surname, generating significant professional tensions or political discomfort. His Jewish colleagues exclusively value his technical expertise in ancient ceramics and scientific contributions to specialized publications. The international academic context allows for collaboration based on professional competence rather than inherited historical identities, a practical demonstration that it is possible to transcend compromised surnames through competent work and consistent ethical conduct. Ricardo Eichmann, at 70 years old, continues to work as an emeritus researcher on projects about civilizations that flourished millennia before the birth of Adolf Eichmann. Among 4,000-year-old Mesopotamian ceramics and Bronze Age Syrian ruins, he has found intellectual refuge in historical periods where the crimes of the 20th century had not yet occurred, and where his last name did not trigger memories of deportations, gas chambers, and mass suffering. His dedication to archaeology represents a deliberate and sustained choice to build scientific knowledge about the remote past, rather than an obsession with the recent history that tragically marks his last name, demonstrating that it is possible to inherit compromised names and simultaneously build respectable academic legacies based on individual merit and positive contributions to human knowledge. Niklas Frank, the son of the Governor-General of Poland. Niklas Frank is one of the most visible direct descendants of the Nazi political establishment. He is the son of Hans Frank, who served as Governor-General of occupied Poland between 1939 and 1945. During that period, his father signed and oversaw administrative measures that facilitated the creation of ghettos, the use of forced labor, mass deportations, and the systematic persecution of the Jewish population. Hans Frank was sentenced to death at the Nuremberg trials and executed in October 1946. Niklas grew up in a post-war Germany marked by silence and reconstruction. His childhood was spent far from his father figure, but under the weight of his family name. As an adult, he pursued a career as a journalist and writer. Unlike other heirs of the Third Reich, his approach has been one of open confrontation with his family history. He has extensively researched his father's role in the Nazi power structure and has published several books and articles in which he accurately describes the magnitude of the crimes committed by his family. His work is based on documentary sources, family archives, and personal diaries. The systematic collection of data allowed him to reconstruct his father's administrative career during the occupation of Poland. Hans Frank resided at Wawel Castle in Krakow, where he headed the civil administration of the general government. From there, he signed decrees affecting millions of people, including orders for the segregation, deportation, and repression of entire communities. Niklas Frank has dedicated much of his life to disseminating this information through educational media. He has participated in documentaries and given lectures at German schools and universities, explaining the Nazi power structure from a direct family perspective. He does not seek public notoriety or present himself as a victim. He uses his access to private documentation to contribute to history education in Germany. Over the decades, she has maintained an active position in the debate on intergenerational responsibility. She believes that family ties to war criminals should not be hidden or softened. Her goal has always been to highlight how decisions made by figures like her father had direct consequences for millions of people, and how those decisions were made with full knowledge of the facts within a rationalized framework of extermination. Niklas has not attempted to erase his surname or reconstruct a new identity. He lives in Hamburg in an urban setting far removed from any symbolism related to his family's past. His daily life is unpretentious and free from unnecessary exposure. He participates in activities related to historical memory only in educational or research contexts. Unlike other descendants who have opted for silence or symbolic disengagement, he has integrated knowledge of his origins into his professional life. He has not received financial compensation, nor has he maintained ties to patrimonial structures linked to Nazism. His relationship with his father has been strictly historical and documentary, without emotional or revisionist elements. Over the past few decades, he has been consulted by academics, journalists, and educational organizations interested in transmitting historical memory. His testimony has been included in audiovisual productions and educational materials, not as a form of personal redemption, but as part of a collective effort to understand the social and familial dimensions of the Nazi regime. Niklas Frank represents a unique case among the heirs of the Third Reich. He does not manage fortunes, head foundations, or participate in ideological debates. His contribution has been strictly documentary, systematizing his father's history, presenting it publicly, and recording its impact within the regime's administrative structures. From his position, he has shown that confronting the past can take rational and objective forms without drama or denial.